Hi there. So my name is Quinn Johnson, and I spent my capstone working with NASDAQ, and my project is corporate sustainability growth under current political conditions. So a little bit of the background that relates to my internship and then the research that I did. In 2021, ISSB, which is the International Sustainability Standards Board, was created, and it's a voluntary framework for reporting sustainability metrics. And a lot of countries around the world, including Japan, Canada, Australia, the UK is in progress on it, have adopted this voluntary framework into a legal and required framework for companies of certain sizes. Additionally, in 2022, the European Union passed CSRD, which is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Disclosure, which requires companies to report sustainability metrics as well. CSRD, however, is a little bit more in depth and requires some more information than ISSB does. However, it only applies to EU nations. And then in 2025, new governments took over in the EU and the US and have scaled back a lot of climate initiatives, including CSRD in the EU, the SEC regulation in the US, which was going through the process of being created, and additionally scaling back investments into different sustainability programs. So that kind of leads into my research question that I thought about throughout my internship and then after, and that was, given the current political climate, how can stakeholders continue to encourage corporate sustainability interest and investment? So at my internship, I worked at NASDAQ within their sustainability division, and I helped our clients with our software, which is a sustainability software that helps these companies to report out their sustainability metrics to different frameworks like ISSB, CSRD, and then other voluntary ones like SASB, CDP, GRI are some examples of those. So I helped our clients with those. And one of the ways that I did that was researching new regulations and changes to regulations, and how that might affect our clients, and created a lot of fact sheets for our sales team and other stakeholders to be able to understand these regulations on a very basic level. Additionally, I conducted a lot of interviews with my own team members as well as people outside of my team and outside of my organization to kind of get a more broad scope about the problems that the industry is facing right now, and how we can continue to support sustainability initiatives. So that all kind of leads into the results. This first figure here is um, less of a result, but more of something that I created as a part of my internship. So a result of the internship. And that's this map that kind of goes along with the fact sheets I made, where this is depicting changes in environmental regulation in countries around the world. So you'll see countries like Canada, Brazil, China, Japan, Australia, that have increased their or created climate reporting regulations, whereas countries like the US and the EU have scaled those back. Um, so that kind of then leads into the stuff that I found from my research and how we can kind of combat the problems that we're facing in certain countries. And the first one is the state's role in the green transition. And given the fact that a lot of these national level governments have been scaling back investment. The first thing that really I found people had said is the importance of state and local governments taking over the economic incentives. So there's a lot of economic incentives, specifically with the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, that had made it very economical for companies to invest in green technologies. However, the current administration has pulled back on a lot of that funding. And so if localities want companies to be continuing this investment to kind of increase those economies of scale and make these green products viable for everybody, they need to step in and create targeted subsidies for those products that don't maybe aren't at the profitability point that we'd like them to be at currently. So they can do that on supply side by giving incentives to the producers, to give them certain subsidies to implement um, green technologies like heat pumps and renewable energies, or it can be on the demand side by providing subsidies to the consumer, like we see with EV tax credits or direct rebates for things in Seattle like e-bikes. The next thing that I found through my research is that voluntary sustainability reporting, especially those voluntary frameworks like ISSB, SASB, GRI, and CDP, they need to simplify their reporting requirements. And this isn't to say that the reporting that gets done isn't very important, but in today's day where there's a lot less funding for sustainability, especially in companies, sustainability professionals need to be able to have time in their schedule to actually do the strategy planning of their job um, and not have to worry about getting all these very specific data points for these different frameworks that they need to report out to. So just focusing on the headline emissions, water, and waste metrics is something that's really important. And then the final thing is something that applies to companies, especially that get government funding or rely on kind of government programs, is changing up the regulation about sustainability. This is mostly just because government programs, especially from the federal government, are targeting companies and organizations that use specific language. Um, that use specific language and are cutting funding to those companies. And so it's really important that for things like when we're talking about clean energy, changing kind of that to energy independence or biodiversity, which we're saying land use, even if the actual meaning is still the same. So yeah, next steps, things that we can do as an organization and individuals, we can help those local governments to implement the economic incentive programs, encourage frameworks like ISSB to simplify the reporting process, and we can work with companies to change the language that they use regarding sustainability. Um, so that's really all I have. And I'd like to thank my site supervisor, Samantha Bradley, my faculty advisor, Fred Purcell, and my family and friends. I appreciate your guys' support.